So here we are, still in American Megafauna and still in the Jurassic period. The card this turn was the Wings card. That's supposedly pretty valuable. Dogface is downgrading his size in order because he can't beat this thingy in size areas anyway. So unless it's in his niches, grazing, nocturnal, he's not going to win anyway. So he starts getting smaller, hoping to get the wings maybe. Biggest event, our little turtle. I had him wrong. I had him up at size 5. It didn't really affect anything. I've dropped it back to 4. He's not allowed to be any larger than 4 tons. That's big turtle. But he became a fast big turtle and became a carnivore because there are no other carnivores, and he has a speed card so he can eat this thing. Now that changed a lot because him pulling out of environments or biomes meant that the Tusker could go into them, and then he just spread out everywhere. You'll see there's little racing turtles everywhere. Reminds me of an escargot joke. Alright, so let's start the next turn. And our card is Crop Foregut Digestion. An extra G. G's are useful. They're the big advantage that Dogface has, and he no longer has any genes to spend on it. So he's not getting it, I would guess. So the world is overrun with 4-ton carnivorous speedy turtles. And of course, there's actually more of these 2 Tuskers that run around at 60 tons. We're talking about as big as they get. I'm running into a problem with this. As far as I know, mammals, there was a good reason mammals didn't get that big. They got big, but also, I'm trying to remember. Anyway, there's a variant in here, the Darwinian variant, which gets rid of some tiebreakers, but among other things, it seems to affect the cold-blooded, warm-blooded, and you may get a more realistic picture out of that. My memory, though, is that, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe somebody can correct me, there weren't any reasonable-sized mammals or proto-mammals or anything until maybe the very end of the Mesozoic period. There weren't any at all. Maybe I'm wrong there. And those that there were very, very tiny. It wasn't until the dinosaurs were gone that the mammals grew to take their spaces. But again, all right, so we've got these giant carnivorous turtles, not that they're mammals, eating these huge 2 Tuskers. And everything else is kind of hanging on in some sense or another. Our squizzards are doing pretty well. Nothing's changing there. Dogface is not happy. He keeps getting smaller. He's down to size 4 now. And he's hoping to be able to get his way into something. The birds, they're really at risk. Alright. Let's see what the next card is. This is the so exciting part. Okay. So we got some sea things. Oh, and we have an event. Milankovitch event. T. Okay, erosion. Orogeny biomes shrink. Oh, I think that's this. I may be wrong here. This. Oh, maybe it's this. Oh no, it is. It's only the dark brown. I don't know what the different colors stand for. They may be from the different sets. Okay, but this is definitely orogeny. I don't know if those other ones are. And oddly enough, I put it in the wrong place. Huh, that's where it starts. Okay, well. I think it goes down. I'm not entirely sure. And what else do we see? All bridges change. So, end up clearing the bridges. Not that they've had an effect yet. Now what about this card? Well, let's see. It gives us plesiosaurs or dolphins. And, oh, plesiosaurs are tiny. I thought they were bigger than that. And lots of ocean power. Nocturnal. Dolphins are a little better. But the advantage, of course, because of the era, goes to the reptiles. So before I looked at, before I go to the bidding, I did look at the rules to try to see what the originating cards are. As far as I can tell, they're darker ones. Well, all of these say no displace. So I think this is, again, a color differential between the expansion and the non-expansion, but these are originating, as are these. So they've all dropped by 1, which is going to be some problems for the things living in them. They're going to have to find something else to do other than live, I guess. Because there's nowhere else to go, really. Things are kind of static in this game. The other variant feels much, maybe it was the cards drawn or whatever, but it feels much more dynamic. I think it's more the critters, because you have a handful of cards to begin with. You can make changes, you can attack people. Here, it's a much more slow developing game. I think I prefer the gameplay of the version that's not yet out, but there's aspects of this one that I fear have been cut away that I think are really cool. So I'm considering, one, I'm hoping that Phil makes some sort of conversion kit available, because it doesn't look like there's a lot of difference. There's component differences, there's rules differences, but the components don't look like they terribly change the game. Now they're changing some of the cards and saying, okay, this should really be this letter sequence or whatever, from a scientific background more than anything else, I think, but it may be gameplay in some cases. But most of the changes to the components have been kind of, oh, it'll be easier to see this way. So there's, the charts up on the top or whatever. It might be going through some heavier changes, though. For example, these cards were served a very different purpose. But he was using these. He was using these with new rules, which a conversion kit would allow you to do. I would really like that, because I think both versions are interesting, and there might be some hybrid in between that's sort of, the perfect game for me. So the only real problem we're seeing is, or the only real change we're seeing, my Squizzard bought that card. It protects his sea interests. He's pretty much in all the ocean areas that it would affect, and he paid, I think, only 1 to get it, because he has the most dinosaur teeth right now. Nobody was willing to go higher. It was interesting. I thought it was most interesting for this guy, but he didn't want to go for a compete. Nobody really did. So he ended up buying something he doesn't really need, and that's kind of cool. But what we saw was those the orogeny, the erosion. The loss of some of these mountain areas, these are areas where tuskers were living, and therefore they're areas where carnivorous turtles lived in the mountains at high speed, at 4 tons. And, now there's less of them, but they're still doing pretty well. Nobody's tapped out of a species yet, and nobody's got 2, so that's pretty good. Let's look at the next card. Oh, what are these? These look like immigrants. Oh no. So I'm not playing with the optional rules, but there is one that allows these to go wipe out everything if they come in. Luckily though, sure. We're going to be using a Mesozoic one. So, primitive something Topsians. Proctopceratops. Now they're going to come in from Asia, up here. And I have to figure out how they come on the board and whether or not anything else happens when they show up. Okay, so here's what happens. Those Proceratops are herbivores with 6 teeth coming in from here. They will go to the first biome that would support them, going from west to east out of here. Well, because the bridge is open. So the first one is an M. They have a W. They're going to take an M for that W. And now there are 2 of that living here. And that's going to be difficult, perhaps, to compete with. I'm not sure. Nah. So they're only size 2. And this thing gives a niche to size. So our squizzards are going to have to get bigger to defeat these rather fishy protoceratopses. It could be a lot worse. That didn't look too bad at all. The other thing that happens is genetic drift, though. Every card seems to have a couple of different effects. And genetic drift means everybody loses a card of their choice out of their hand. I'm going to lose the G. It's a fine card, but I think being able to speciate is more important. Critters this way, garbage this way. Alright, well, now we're on to the regular cycle of play over here. Something I should explain briefly about these immigrants. If someone was knocked out of the game, i.e. all their creatures were extinct, they can wait around for an immigrant, it's called the hopeful monster, and start over again with this new critter. And that's a lot of teeth to have for a new critter, for example. A lot of mammal teeth. Anyway, it's just a neat way to get you back in the game. I'm not sure that it particularly disadvantages you. So, for example, there are people like the bird who are in much worse shape than somebody would have been starting with this at this point. Because victory points are only counted here and here, there's no telling what might happen. That might do very, very well. Of course, it might not come up at all. And in this case, it's just not going to make it. It's going to fail. But it's an interesting mechanism or dynamic to keep people maybe able to come back in. So the threat of losing cards scared our squizzard, and he made a Plesiosaurus type thing. He also raised the size of both his critters. The Plesiosaurus inherits all the little DNA that he already has. So it's now 4 M's, an N, and the 2 A's, which is quite a scary critter. And he's spread out. He's not dominating everything. It's certainly bigger than this thing, which is the niche advantage. So this thing just dies. And then otherwise, everything stayed pretty static. Again, that's the way the game is. I'm going to wrap this one and send it up, and we'll start the next one with the new card.